My Aunt Dorothy is a nightmare, and now my mother is starting to resent being around me because I did something stupid, as she liked to say, when we went over to Aunt Dorothy's and I let out kind of a family secret. Let me tell you about it. Hey, my mother just declared to my cousin that I'm dead to her, and I don't think I did anything to deserve it. I come from an average family, and my parents never went to college. My father worked as a chef by day and a security guard by night, and this was to make sure that my younger brother, Declan, and I exceeded the limits that he and our mother could not. My father took on 2 jobs and did not make things easier for us, as our mom was a stay-at-home wife who had no business whatsoever. There were times when we would be in a tight financial situation, and it was my mother's younger sister, Aunt Dorothy, who always bailed us out by sending money, right? Aunt Dorothy was a divorcee who had a daughter the same age as my brother, and she was rich. Thanks to her rich ex-husband, I could count the times that she had come to our house ever since I've known her. My father had a stroke when I was about to graduate from high school and my younger brother from junior high. This meant he had to stop working and there was no more income coming in. Aunt Dorothy was quite supportive with her money during this period, but we began sensing some form of irritation at some point. And I pretty much understand because having somebody depend on you can be so irritating. My father passed after a while as we could not manage his illness. The news of my father's death was put out and people began coming to pay condolence. Aunt Dorothy showed up and sympathized with us. She promised to cover the cost of the funeral and we were grateful. Aunt Dorothy began making arrangements and we were awed at the fact that she was giving my dad a king's burial. I believe we are to honor our departed loved ones, and that includes my father, but this was way too much. For instance, my aunt was buying a casket of about $3,000. We are all struggling with the reality that we would need money for my college and my younger brother's high school fees, and a funeral of such magnitude was foolish, in my opinion. Even my dad, who would be placed inside, would agree. I spoke with my mother and suggested that we meet with our aunt to settle for a moderate funeral, so we could just, use whatever was left over to support ourselves. Financially, at least, after we buried our father. My mother and Declan, of course, and I went to visit Aunt Dorothy. We began by thanking her for how she had shown her support so far before going on to make our suggestion. Aunt Dorothy noted that her brother-in-law would be buried properly, and she did not mind spending so much money. As for our fears about not having enough to keep us going after the burial, she noted that she knew that we were in a very difficult financial position, and she did not intend on abandoning us, not at all. Aunt Dorothy's response was comforting, and we decided to let her organize the funeral however she saw fit. The funeral was great, but after it was done, everybody, including my aunt, returned to their homes and forgot that we even existed. Well, we lived on the little thing that we had while hoping Aunt Dorothy would reach out and make good on her promise. Time began going against us, and school was going to be in session, so I needed to apply for college, and Declan needed to go to school too, so we had to reach out to Aunt Dorothy. We tried calling Aunt Dorothy's line, but she was not picking up, and she did not bother returning the call. I suggest that we went directly to her house, and that's exactly what we did. We got to Aunt Dorothy's place, and I noticed that she did not seem happy to see us. She welcomed us anyways, and we thanked her for everything before stating our reason for coming. Aunt Dorothy, listened to every word that we had said before she began complaining about how things were for her at the time. She claimed she was handling lots of projects at the time and things were tight for her. She promised that she would get back to us and noted that we were not to come to her house till she sent for us. This is what my mother's younger sister said. It took about a month before my mother received a call from her sister who asked us to come over to her house. So we get to her place and she noted that she could not sponsor my brother or me. She, however, noted that she had opened a grocery store, which she wanted my mother to manage. This meant that she was going to be my mother's boss. My mother willingly agreed. We needed a means to survive, and we would not kick out the only offer which was on the table. My mom went to the place that she was to manage, and it was understaffed. She told her younger sister about the need to hire workers, and I could not believe what my aunt said. Aunt Dorothy said the grocery had just been opened and a lot of revenue was put into it. She asked my mother to have Declan help out in the store since he was not going to be going to school. She, however, promised to hire workers in the future when the business was booming. As for me, she suggested that I come to live with her, so it would help reduce the number of mouths that my mother was supposed to feed. I found the idea of living with my aunt to be uncomfortable. I just did not feel like it would turn out well. I did not hide my thoughts from my mother at all. My mother saw nothing wrong with it and was grateful to have gotten a job from her younger sister. There would be no difference between living with her sister and living in our home since I would be still living with family. My mother, well, she was right when she said that Aunt Dorothy was family because she was related to us by blood, but she was wrong in the sense that her sister never treated me like one. I knew my hunch to never live with my aunt was very correct from the first day that I got there. Chores were waiting for me, and I wondered why it was so when my aunt's daughter Clara was home. I began trying to make a good impression by taking on the errands, but there was no end to it. The worst part of it was that Clara never bothered to lend a hand. I purposely began asking her to do certain things and she would just grumble and take the whole time in the world before getting anything done. I discovered that each time I asked her to do a thing, her mother, Aunt Dorothy, would seem displeased and I just could not understand why. From where I come from, my younger brother would dare not sit idle while his older sister does all the chores. The matter progressed to my aunt now making excuses for Clara each time I asked her to help out. I felt bad about it, but I did my best not to explode. Things, however, never got any better. I was turned into a practical slave, and the worst part about it was that I was not being paid. I called my mother severely to complain about the issue, and she said that I was just to be grateful for where I was because most people would kill just to be in my shoes. Well, they would equally be killed with house chores if they got themselves a pair of my shoes. I did my best not to let the matter escalate, but my best was not good enough. My aunt got back home one day and found Clara, and I at the parlor. Clara was watching TV while I had passed out on the couch of exhaustion. Aunt Dorothy woke me up and questioned why certain things were left undone while I slept lazy in the parlor like I owned the place. I tried to explain to her that I had not been idle while she was out and I was just so tired that I did not even know that I've drifted asleep. I don't know what my aunt found offensive about my statement because her next action was so unwarranted. Aunt Dorothy gave me 2 dirty slaps and said I was talking back at her. I did not know when I lost myself and told her that the house would have been better if she had told her daughter Clara to help out anyways. I knew what my response meant, and I immediately put some distance between my aunt and me. Aunt Dorothy rushed at me while I ran. We ran in circles and I bumped into the wall while at it, and I did not bother checking out what happened to my face as I knew it would be nothing compared to what my aunt would do to me if she caught me, so I kept on running. Till I was out of the house and I went back to my mother and brother with my face bleeding. The scar from that day has remained on my face ever since, and each time I stand in the mirror, I remember my aunt and equally cursed that day that she came into my life. Back to my story. I got to our house and neither my mother nor brother was around as they were still at the grocery store, which Aunt Dorothy had given to my mother to manage. My mother came in the evening and she was so mad at me. She did not even consider the fact that her daughter had run out of her sister's house with nothing but the clothes that she was putting on and a bleeding face. I knew her younger sister, who was equally her boss, had told her about the drama which occurred at her place, and I was sure that she twisted the whole tale. My mother did not want to listen to anything which I had to say. I was the villain as far as she was concerned, and it hurt me because her job was more important to her than her daughter. Declan was the only one who was on my side, and that's because he was not biased. Aunt Dorothy drove to our house the next day to drop off my belongings. You see, she expected me to grovel at her feet and plead for mercy while pledging allegiance to never defying her again. But I did not even bother leaving my room to come see her. My mother slandered me in front of her younger sister, and I knew it's because she wanted to keep her job. My aunt left the house, and my mother told me straight to my face that that's the only thing that she would provide for me was shelter, but I was to feed myself. Since I had bitten the hand which had been feeding me, that's how I began taking on jobs just to feed myself while living with my mom. The relationship between my mother and I did not improve over the years, and this was because she was dancing to the tune of her younger sister. Aunt Dorothy was involved in an accident 3 weeks ago, and she was admitted to the hospital where she was in a coma. Everybody, especially my mother, rallied around her and her daughter Clara and wished her a speedy recovery. Their wishes did not come to pass. Aunt Dorothy passed away after 3 weeks at the hospital in intensive care, and I never visited her, and I did not send any goodwill messages. I was not like I derived joy at her misfortune or anything. I simply decided to stay on my own. Aunt Dorothy's death shook everybody except for me. She had cut me off from her life while she was alive, so there's no use mourning her demise. My mother asked that I reach out to Clara to offer my condolences, but I refused. I told my mom that Clara's loss was her business, and this really annoyed my mother. My mother tried compelling me to do so, but I was firm in my resolve. Funeral arrangements were made, the day of her burial was fixed, and my mom informed me that we would be going to, as a family, to show support. I told my mother that I did not count Clara as family, so I would not show up there. Not at all. My mother lost it. She said that Clara was, her niece was now her new boss, and if I did not show support, then it could jeopardize her relationship with her. Her concern was her business, and before I could even prove adamant, my mother noted that she was going to throw me out of the house if I missed out on my aunt's burial. The threat to kick me out of the house quickly made me change my mind, but what I never knew was that the following my mom to the funeral would cause me to further alienate myself from my family. You see, Aunt Dorothy's casket was open for people to pay their last respect, and there was a platform created for those who wanted to make marks about how Aunt Dorothy had influenced their lives. I watched as everybody had something good to say. These were people who did not know her up close to discover that she treated outsiders way better than she did her relatives, and this was because she wanted to maintain a good image in the society. Well, it worked for her. My mother asked that I say something on behalf of the family, and this was a bad idea, but my mother was not willing to take no for an answer. Okay, so I finally started talking about how Aunt Dorothy had been of great help and assistance to our family right before my father's demise. I did my best to speak well of the deceased, but something in my statement. I looked at her corpse, and the images of the day I sustained a life-threatening injury on my face because of her flooded my mind. I remembered everything like it happened just a few moments ago. I immediately veered off from the direction of praise, which I was heading in, and began exposing her to folks. The true nature of the woman who, they had come to bury. I did not spare Clara. As I told Present that the apple did not fall far from the tree, I claimed that she had inherited the same distasteful, lazy attitude of her mother, and I used the evidence of the scar on my face as proof. My words caused tension in the atmosphere. I get the fact that I may have been wrong to have said these things, and I said then, even though they were true, but don't blame me. I did not realize when it began. When the gravity of what I had done dawned on me, I immediately walked out of the venue and went straight home. My mother came home and came hard at me. I did not claim to be sorry because I wasn't. The only thing I was sorry about was not saying what I had said while my aunt was alive, so she could be humiliated a bit. Anybody who hears or may have heard me talk about my aunt the way that I did could easily tag me as wicked. But nobody knows how traumatized I've been since the day I left my aunt's house with a scar on my face. I felt a form of relief doing what I did. My mother said I was going to personally apologize to Clara, but doing that would simply take away the taste of revenge in my mouth, so I refused. My mother was still at the point of throwing threats at me when Clara drove down to our house. She had been so wounded and embarrassed by the things I said about her mom that she abandoned her guest at her home to come and challenge me. The moment she got to the house, she began accusing my mother of bringing me to the funeral so I can embarrass her by painting her late mother in a horrible light. My mother immediately said she was equally heartbroken by my actions and went further to tell Clara that I was dead to her because of my actions. I acted like I did not hear what my mother had told Clara. It was clear she was butt-kicking her niece just as she was butt-kissing the mom for her job. Clara did not buy what my mother said and insisted that I make a video where I apologized to her and her late mother. She intended to upload the video on her social media handles, where she had most of the sympathizers as friends at the funeral. It was at that point that I spoke up and told her that the only video I would make, if I was going to make anyone, would be me shedding more light on the wickedness of her mother. Well, Clara turned to my mother and told her not to bother coming to work if the apology did not come through. She even noted that my mother's job would be given to somebody else. My mom is currently mounting pressure on me to do the apology video so she can save her job. I don't care what happens, but nothing in this world would make me dance to Clara's tune. If my mother knows what's best for her, she better start looking for a job. Update number 1. My mom just kicked me out of the house, and it hurts me so bad since, I saw it coming. After she had stopped going to work and was on the verge of losing her job, she began mounting pressure on me to make the apology video I would not succumb. In a desperate bid to get me to bow, my mother began threatening to kick me out of the house on the 3rd day, which was the deadline that Clara had given her. The threat was not new to me, and I was already planning on using the little money that I'd put aside while taking on different jobs to rent a home. The toxicity in my family was choking me alive. My mom went on the 3rd day, and I knew she was going to meet Clara, and she had gone with Declan. They came back a few hours later, and my mother asked me to leave her house, and I was now the source of her problems. I asked her to give me a few days to get a place, but she said I would not spend another night in her household. Declan wanted to intervene, but she immediately shut him up, and even threatened to throw him out with me if he waded into the matter. Before I knew what was happening, she began throwing my stuff out of the house. I knew that my mother's actions were simply because of her job, and I looked my mother in the face and asked how could she just choose a comfortable life over her daughter, and she replied with, without any emotions, that she would choose a comfortable life over a stubborn child who was dead to her. Her words hit me hard. I was trying to process what I just heard, and she empathetically asked me to stay away from her as I was dead to her. I gathered my stuff immediately, the little things I had left, and I left. I know that I was making plans to leave our family house, but having my mother throw me out and pained me, I've gotten a one-room apartment, and the only person with whom I'm in touch now is my younger brother, Declan. He recently disclosed the contents of my mother's discussion with Clara on the day that she kicked me out, and it further built resentment in me towards my mom. Declan said our mother, in a bid to secure her job by proving to Clara that she was displeased with my actions, had told Clara that she's going to kick me out of the house and she's willing to do an apology video, where she would label me as a stubborn, ungrateful brat. She said that Clara could upload the video on her social media handles and prove to her friends that I was talking trash at her mom's funeral. Well, Clara bought the idea that having my mother's discredit what I had said would prove to those present on the funeral day that I was a nutcase. She, however, noted that my mother would only resume her work with a higher pay once the video was done. Update number 2. I returned the favor to my mom yesterday by telling her she was equally dead to me, and I meant it. Things have been tough for me ever since I moved into my rented apartment. The money, which I saved up, was to use to pay the rent I fed and was what was left. My mother had warned Declan to stay away from me, but he would not listen. He would often sneak out of the house to visit me with supplies and whatnot. Well, we both knew that he would be in trouble if our mother found out what he's been doing, but Declan, who was against the way my mother had handled the issues between us, said I was worth the risk. He came to my home yesterday, which was on a weekend, and he told me that our mother had resumed her job with a much higher pay. I knew about the condition that Clara had set, so I asked Declan if Mother made the video. Declan said nothing, and he pulled out his phone and went to Clara's Facebook page and played a video that was posted on her timeline. I went cold as I saw my mother say unprintable things about me. There's no way somebody who sees the video would not mistake me for a terrible individual. My mother went on to say that she was not in support of my attitude, and I simply have moved out of the house when she reprimanded me. I began doubting if, the woman I had seen as my mother all these years was truly my mom. I was lost in thought when my door suddenly opened and my mother walked in my room with rage. She looked at Declan and I, and then out of the food stuff which she had brought me. She began shouting at me for not staying out of her life, and before I could say anything, she quickly picked up the things that Declan had brought, opened them up, and poured them on the floor. She went on to say that she would rather have her resources wasted than let me eat it. Tears began streaming down my face, and at this point, they did not touch my mother. I did not know when the words "I hate you" escaped from my lips, and I told her that she was dead to me and made her a promise to never see me for the rest of her life. My mother looked angry towards Declan, who had his head bowed, and then she turned to me and said that she hoped I would keep my promise of staying far away from her and her food. She stormed out of my room just the same way that she had come in, and Declan followed suit. He would later send me a text to say that our mother had issued the final warning for him to stay away from me or move out of the house. I've asked him to keep his distance, as he would suffer if he's kicked out by his mom. I've made my decision to move on with my life, and I now term myself as an orphan. Update number 3. Guys, it's been 2 years since I've last heard from my brother Declan, and though I'm doing well, I miss my brother so much. I had firmly insisted that he cut contact with me because I did not want him to get into trouble. Declan surprisingly showed up at my apartment 3 days ago, and though he admitted that he missed me, he was in no mood to exchange pleasantries. He began telling me that our mom had been admitted to the hospital for about a month now, and though she had been receiving treatment, her condition had not improved, and the doctors noted she needed to undergo surgery. This was the second surgery she was supposed to undergo. Declan said that they had spent all the money they had on them and still needed money for the cost. He looked intently at me for a response when he was done, but I did not seem disturbed by the news that he's given me. I finally began by correcting his statement. I told him my mother was not at any hospital because I was an orphan. The lady who he was referring to was, my mother, who died 2 years ago, and I've moved on. Declan began pleading with me not to repay our mother's wickedness with evil, but I told him that though I had the money, I would rather give it to charity than let a dime be spent on her. I'd stayed away from her life and resources, and I expected her to do the same. Declan left my apartment in tears because I would not help out, quote, our mother. I had inquired while she did not return and just run to Clara for assistance, but Declan said that the only thing Clara had given her was leave without pay. Talk about wickedness. Serves her right, though. I was, however, touched by Declan's tears that after struggling with myself, I decided to go and see how I could help out with the hospital bills. This was not because I wanted to make up with my mother. It's simply because I knew the level of trauma and stress that my younger, brother was going through since he was the one bearing the burden. I showed up at the hospital and I got to my mother's warden. Declan was sitting beside her and I overheard him tell her that they were out of options to raise the money. I announced my presence by calling out to Declan and asking to speak with him outside. My mother, who could not look at me, bent her head in shame. I did not say a word or make any kind of gestures that was suggested of me being sympathetic to her problem, well, because I wasn't. I went to Declan to the doctor's office and made an initial deposit so the operation could begin. I walked out of the hospital without saying a word to my mother. I didn't even want a thank you from her. I would be making the final payment before she's due to be discharged. Update number 4. Hey guys, I believe this will be my final update on the whole drama. Well, it's been occurring between my mother, Clara, and me. All these years you've been following along. Yesterday made it 3 weeks since my last update and my mother had undergone surgery. She's discharged in 2 weeks from now, so I went to make the remaining part of the payment as I noted. I got to the hospital and I tried reaching Declan via his phone so he could come to me since I did not want to set eyes on our mother, but Declan was not answering. I had no option but to walk up to the mother's ward. Well, I was close to the door when I heard a very, very familiar voice. It was Clara. I kept still so I could hear what she was saying to my mother and Declan had noted that she was yet to visit my mom. I listened to Clara tell my mother that she had done her best to give her some time to heal without having anybody take up her position, but her business had suffered as a result. She then informed my mother that somebody else has been employed to take over my mother's position, so my mother should not bother coming back even after she's recovered. The astonishing part of Clara's talk was that she claimed she was respecting my mother by telling her in person. Well, it dawned on my mother the kind of user that Clara was. Clara did not help out financially. Neither did she visit to show support, and she just showed up to fire my mom. I immediately asked her to leave the room, and everybody turned around to find me standing there. Clara looked at me in a berating manner, then made a side comment while taking her leave. I immediately pulled her back by the hair and a fight ensued. You know who the victor was, right? I mean, neither Declan nor our mother was fixated on the bed could separate us, so Declan ran to get the nurses. Before help came, however, I had poured out my fury on Clara. It was nothing compared to my image, which she had damaged using my mother's help, but hey, it was damn satisfying. Clara was in tears as she took her leave and threatened to take my pay, but I knew it was all talk. She could never make me pay. I went with the doctor to make the final payment, and I returned to my mother's ward to inform Declan that I was taking my leave. My mother immediately burst into tears and began apologizing profusely for everything. I didn't even let her speak. I reminded her that her daughter died 2 years ago, and the only reason I was at this hospital right now was because of Declan. I went on to warn her never to attempt getting in touch with me, otherwise I would file a restraining order against her. So, I left the hospital and I carried on with my life. I know my mother would need serious assistance after she's discharged, but hey, that's not my business. I believe I've helped her beyond what she deserves.
So guys, believe it or not, there were a few comments that were saying how OP was completely in the wrong for the way that she cut off her mother and for the way that her aunt treated her and, well, just the overall treatment that OP gave back to both elders. I do want to know your thoughts on that. In my opinion, it's completely ridiculous because OP was maltreated and very, very, very toxically treated by her aunt. So I don't, well, blame her for resenting her Aunt Dorothy, but maybe you guys are thinking different, and if you are, go ahead and share your opinion in the comment section down below. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. My name's Mr. Reddito, and I narrate family dramas, inheritance dramas, relationship issues, Karen in the Wild stories, bridezillas, you name it, I cover it. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Go ahead, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel as well, but remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.